They said no one survives a crash on Riven Bay. Too remote, too broken, too forgotten. But when Dana Greer crawled from the wreckage, bleeding and hunted, something ancient stirred beneath the surface of that dead world. She wasn't just running from betrayal. She was carrying a secret buried so deep, not even she knew what it was. And now, as shadows return to finish what they started, one question burns louder than the rest. What if the survivor was never the victim, but the key to everything they feared? Before we start, please, subscribe to the channel by clicking the car button on the top right corner now, and hit the notification bell so you can get amazing daily stories as and when published. Please do comment your views about the story or any topic that you want to get a story on. We will make it happen. Let's dive in the story. The sea was not supposed to reach this far, and yet here it was, crashing over the shattered concrete, licking at the twisted remains of a shuttle hull like a dog grieving its fallen master. Waves thudded against rusted pylons and skeletal frames of what was once the Riven Bay outpost. Broken metal sang its eerie chorus, twisted by salt, wind, and time. Above, clouds sagged low and gray, casting a pale, blue-white glow over the ruins. She stood among it all. Dana Greer didn't move. Her sleek, dark survival suit was torn in 3 places. Dried blood crusted along her temple, though she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes, a shade of burnt amber, were fixed on the horizon, unblinking, unreadable. The wreckage behind her smoked faintly, but no rescue ships came. No alarm sounded. The galaxy had already moved on. A gust of wind carried the scent of ozone and oil. A gull drone buzzed overhead. Its low were echoing in the emptiness. She barely registered it. What she did register was the crunch of boots behind her. "You're a long way from home," a voice called out. Low, calm, dusty. The kind of voice that belonged in deserts and broken saloons. Not in a place like this. Dana didn't turn around. The man stepped into her peripheral vision. Late 30s, maybe 40. Weathered face, strong jaw, eyes the color of cracked slate. His jacket hung loose, worn at the edges. A plasma rifle rested across his back, not in a threatening way, more like a habit. He cocked his head, studying her. Not many crash on Riven Bay and walk away. You must be made of something strange. Or just stubborn, Dana muttered without looking at him. His lip twitched into a faint smirk. That too. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder toward a narrow path that snaked up the bluff behind him. Got shelter up there. Food. Real bed. I'll even throw in silence if you like it better than conversation. She eyed him then, turning just enough to meet his gaze. What makes you think I'm not dangerous? He gave a short laugh. Look around, lady. This place hasn't seen danger in 10 years. It's seen loss, sure. Decay, definitely. But you... He shrugged. You look like someone who's already survived whatever tried to kill her. I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask for company, he shot back, then added with a smirk. But the bay doesn't leave room for pickiness. She hesitated. The wind picked up again, whistling through the ruined beams behind her. He took a slow step back, giving her space. You can stay here and rust with the wreckage, he said, or you can follow me and find out if there's still something human left in both of us. Dana's gaze lingered on him. Not trust, not hope, but something unsettled. Her body ached. Her mind screamed for silence. And yet, her feet moved. One step, then another. As she passed him, he nodded slightly. Name's Callan, he said. She didn't answer. That's fine, he added. We'll work on small talk later. And together, they disappeared into the crumbling gray, the sea howling behind them like a ghost that hated being left alone. The path up the bluff was narrow and uneven, scattered with rust flakes and broken shells that crunched beneath their boots. Dana didn't ask where they were going. She didn't speak at all. She just walked, eyes on the ground, hands slightly trembling, not from weakness, but from something she hadn't named yet. Callan glanced at her sideways every so often, but said nothing until they reached the top. The shelter looked like it had been welded together from scraps of forgotten ships and military leftovers. A half-buried container served as the main structure, patched with solar panels, rusted scaffolding, and a satellite dish that spun lazily in the breeze. "This is it," Callan said. "Home sweet hermitage. Dana the place. Charming. Don't get all misty-eyed now." She smirked, barely, but it was there. The first crack in the armor. He keyed in a code on the steel door, and it slid open with a hiss. The inside was warmer than expected. Clean, too. Sparse lighting glowed from recessed panels. A cot tucked in one corner. Tools hanging above a workbench. A shelf of old books. And on a small stove, something actually cooking. Callan tossed his rifle onto a chair and moved toward the pot. "Stew. Might be edible. Depends on how forgiving your stomach is." "I've had worse," Dana muttered, stepping inside cautiously. Her eyes flicked around, tracing every corner, every exit. "You can relax," he said, stirring the pot. "I'm not planning on locking you up or stealing your spleen." "Good to know," she replied, voice dry. "I've grown attached to it." Callan laughed. "You've got sarcasm. That's a good sign. Means you're not dead inside." She gave a quiet snort, but didn't smile. She stood awkwardly by the door, not quite stepping all the way in. "Look, you can sit," he said, ladling stew into 2 metal bowls. "I don't bite. I mean, unless it's during a poker game or a lightning storm." She finally stepped forward and sat, back straight, as if expecting an ambush from the furniture. He handed her a bowl and a spoon. She took it slowly, watching him like he might vanish if she blinked too long. "You got a name?" he asked. Silence. He lifted his spoon. "Or should I keep calling you Crash Lady?" "Dana," she said quietly. Callan nodded. "Dana. All right. Progress." They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't hostile, just cautious, like 2 wolves circling the same fire, unsure whether to share the warmth or steal the other's throat. Eventually, he leaned back. "So, what were you running from?" Her grip on the spoon tightened. "I wasn't running," she said. He didn't push, just watched her for a moment, then nodded. "All right." Another silence. This one softer. "You're not the only ghost on this hill," Callan added. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." Dana's gaze drifted to the stew, then to the flames flickering under the pot. She didn't reply, but she stayed. That alone spoke louder than any answer she could have given. And outside, the sea kept crashing, but for now, it couldn't reach her. The wind howled that night. It clawed at the shelter walls, rattling loose panels and moaning through narrow gaps like something alive and angry. The sky outside had turned an unnatural shade of copper, storm front rolling in from the east. Somewhere below, in the skeletal remains of Riven Bay, metal shrieked as another tower finally collapsed into the sea. Inside the shelter, Dana sat at the edge of the cot, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Her hands were clenched tight, knuckles pale. The warmth from the stew had faded, but the knot in her stomach remained. Callan moved quietly behind her, locking down the external panels. "Storm's creeping up faster than expected," he muttered. "Might be one of those charged ones. Lots of static. Could fry the comm lines." Dana didn't respond. He glanced back. Her posture hadn't changed. "You okay?" he asked. She flinched, just slightly. "I don't like storms," she said flatly. Callan's brow lifted. "Because they're loud, or?" Her eyes flicked up, and for a moment, something in them cracked. "Because last time one hit, I wasn't alone, and only I walked away." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat on the floor across from her, arms resting loosely over his knees. "I lost people too," he said. 3 years ago. Trade convoy. Hit a pirate grid out near Glaris Field. Should have turned back, but I thought I could outrun them." Dana's gaze didn't shift, but her fingers slowly loosened. "They killed everyone," Callan continued. "I made it to the escape pod with 1 engine sputtering and 2 cracked ribs." He chuckled bitterly. "Spent a week drifting. Would have died if a scavenger hadn't picked up the distress ping and thought I was salvage. Dana studied him in silence. "So why stay here?" she asked. "This place feels like a grave." Callan shrugged. "Maybe it is. Or maybe it's a reminder." "Of what?" "That some things survive even when everything else burns." Lightning split the sky outside, flashing white through the shelter cracks. Dana stiffened, shoulders tensing at the sound. Callan saw it. "You ever get that thing," he said, "where your body remembers before your brain does? Like a sound, a smell, just yanks you back?" Her voice was a whisper. "Every time it rains." The air between them thickened, the storm pressing down on the shelter like a weight. Callan stood and walked to a crate in the corner, pulling out a tattered blanket. He tossed it her way. "Storm's gonna scream all night," he said. "Might as well be warm while it does." She caught it, hesitated, then wrapped it around her shoulders. The silence that followed wasn't tense, it was waiting. She looked at him. "You always taking crash victims?" He smirked. "Only the ones who look like they could kill me in my sleep." Danes lips twitched. Almost a smile. "I won't," she said softly. "Not tonight. See? That's the best offer I've had in months." And for the first time since the crash, the silence felt less like drowning and more like breathing. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world drenched and eerily quiet. The sea was calmer now, but the air was thick with that metallic scent storms always left behind. Ozone, rust, and something ancient that Dana couldn't name. She stood near the edge of the bluff, her arms folded tight over her chest. The blanket Callan had given her the night before was still draped over her shoulders, damp at the corners. The wind tugged at her hair, strands clinging to her cheeks. But she didn't move. Behind her, the sheltered door creaked open. "You keep standing that close to the edge, I'm gonna think you've got a death wish," Callan said, stepping out with 2 mugs in hand. Dana didn't look at him. "I don't want to die," she said. "That's the problem." Callan stopped mid-step. Then he walked up beside her and offered one of the mugs. "Strong brew. Smells like engine coolant. Tastes like regret." She took it without a word. The heat against her fingers grounded her more than she expected. They stood in silence for a minute, watching as seabirds circled the wreckage below. Callan took a slow sip, then said, "So, want to tell me what really brought you here?" Dana exhaled, her breath misting faintly in the cold. "I was with a recon unit, corporate scouts. We were assigned to map the outer sectors, report anomalies, tag resources. But we found something we weren't supposed to." Callan's grip on the mug tightened. "What kind of something?" "A vault," she said. "Buried tech. Not alien. Not ours either. It was old. Powerful. My captain wanted to sell it on the black grid. I said no." She finally looked at him. "They made it look like I stole it. Label me a traitor. Shot my co-pilot in the back and staged a crash." Callan's jaw tensed. "And you crashed here running from them?" Dana nodded. "I don't even know if they're still chasing me. I just kept going." He turned to face her fully. "You ever think maybe you weren't supposed to find that vault?" Her eyes darkened. "I was supposed to find something. Maybe not that, but something. I just didn't expect the price." Callan was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "you talk like someone who's tired of running." She gave a faint laugh, bitter dry. "I am. But the galaxy doesn't exactly hand out safe places." He smirked. "Maybe not, but sometimes it gives you a break. Even if it's small. Even if it's here." They stood there, the wind brushing past them like a ghost with no place to land. "I don't trust easy," Dana said. "I don't ask for easy," Callan replied. "I just ask for real." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Then I guess this is a start." "Good," he said, "because you've got that look, like someone who's about to do something reckless." She smirked. "You don't even know the half of it." Callan raised his mug in a mock toast. "To bad decisions." Dana clinked hers against his. "To surviving them." And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like a storm waiting to break. The next few days passed like a strange dream, quiet, grounded, almost too normal for someone who just escaped betrayal and near death. Dana helped Callan reinforce the west-facing wall of the shelter, cleared debris around the bluff, and even repaired one of the broken sensor beacons with a precision that impressed him. "You sure you weren't born in a machine shop?" Callan asked as she calibrated the final circuit. Dana smirked, wiping her hands on a rag. "Better than being born in a boardroom, like half the execs who sent us to die." He leaned against the frame, watching her work. "You're different when you're focused. Like the world fades out. Maybe that's the only way I know how to keep from falling apart," she said quietly. Callan didn't argue. He just nodded. That night, she sat cross-legged in the corner of the shelter, twisting a handful of wires into a loop, fidgeting more than building. "Did you mean it?" she asked suddenly. Callan looked up from his chair. "Mean what?" "When you said I wasn't the only ghost on this hill." He set down his drink, his face going still. Then he stood and walked to the shelves. From behind a faded crate, he pulled out a small, dented music box. "Used to belong to my sister," he said. "Mara. She was younger, smarter, funnier. Kept me from losing my mind when our parents got drafted. She used to sneak out and trade scrap for old books. Stuffed this thing in her bag every time we moved." Dana stared at the box. "She died?" she asked softly. Callan nodded, jaw tight. "Sickness hit our colony fast. No cure, no warning. She was gone in 2 days." Dana swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, forcing a breath. "Everyone loses someone. Some just lose everything." She reached out and touched the music box gently, fingertips brushing the metal like it might vanish. "You kept it all this time?" "Because it plays one note," he said. "Just one. Broken spring. But even now, that note feels like her." Dana's throat tightened. She blinked quickly, trying to chase back the burn in her eyes. "You're the first person I've talked to since the crash," she said. "Really talked to." He sat down beside her, careful not to close the space too fast. "I wasn't sure you ever would," he admitted. "Me neither." They sat in silence, broken only by the wind outside and the soft hum of the generator. Then the beacon lit red. Dana was on her feet in an instant. "What's that?" Callan bolted to the console. "Perimeter alert. Proximity breach. 2 incoming ships. Small class. No broadcast IDs." Her heart dropped. "They found me." Callan's voice sharpened. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He looked at her. No fear in his eyes, only focus. "Then we've got about 7 minutes." Dana grabbed her jacket. "What are we doing?" "We're not running," Callan said. "You already did that. You're not a ghost anymore, Dana." She met his gaze. "No," she said. "I'm not. I'm done hiding." And in that moment, as red lights pulsed across the shelter walls, Dana Greer wasn't prey anymore. She was ready to fight. The hum of approaching engines was low but unmistakable, like a warning growl echoing off the cliffside. Dana crouched beside the outer hatch, her pulse steady, her breath slow. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she locked in the charges along the outer wall. Improvised explosives. Nothing fancy, but enough to make someone think twice. Callan emerged from the shelter with a shotgun slung over one shoulder and a bandolier strapped across his chest. "You really think they'll try to breach from the front?" Dana didn't look up. "They always do. Bullies want the loud entrance." He nodded, flipping down his visor. "Good. I hate surprises." The moment the first ship touched down on the ridge, they felt it in their bones. A jolt, then another. Dana peeked over the rock ledge just in time to see 2 black-clad figures descend from the shuttle ramp. Rifles raised, visors glowing red. "Mercenaries," she muttered. "Not corporate. They're outsourcing now." Callan crouched beside her. "Cheap muscle with better weapons. Love that." She smirked. "Ready. Always." The moment the third man stepped off the ship, Dana hit the detonator. The ridge exploded with a flash of orange light, rock and smoke scattering into the sky. One mercenary went down screaming. The others dove for cover. Callan took the shot, clean, controlled. striking the nearest enemy in the shoulder and spinning him into the dirt. The return fire lit up the ridge. "They're pushing left," Callan shouted. Dana darted behind a twisted support beam, drawing her pulse pistol and firing 3 sharp blasts. One hit. The second missed. The third clipped the edge of a rifle, sending it flying. Another merc rushed her position. She waited, calm, then slammed her elbow into his throat as he rounded the corner, dropped him with a swift knee to the ribs, and snatched his sidearm before he hit the ground. "Still think I needed protecting?" she called out. Callan chuckled through the comm. "Remind me never to piss you off." The last 2 mercs regrouped, firing blindly toward the shelter. Then silence. Dana's eyes narrowed. "Something's wrong." Callan stood slowly from behind the barricade. "Where's the shuttle pilot?" They turned at the same time. A figure stepped through the smoke, helmetless now, but not unfamiliar. "Lyron," Dana growled. The man's smile was cruel and calm. "Did you really think they'd stop looking for you?" he said. "They've invested too much. You're not just a fugitive, Dana. You're property." Callan's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Back off," he warned. "Now." Lyron raised his hands. "I don't want blood," he said. "I want her. She comes quietly, and we leave." Dana stepped forward. "I'm not going anywhere with you. You think this changes anything?" Lyron sneered. "You're a glitch. An experiment. A mistake." She lifted the pistol and leveled it at his heart. "No," she said coldly. "I'm the one who remembers." Callan moved beside her, standing tall. "Last chance," he said. Lyron's smirk faded, and then Dana fired. The shot echoed like thunder across the cliff. As Lyron dropped, the remaining mercs fled without a word. The ship powered up and vanished into the clouds. Dana lowered the weapon, her arms trembling slightly. Callan looked at her, eyes wide with something between awe and relief. "You good?" She exhaled slowly. "Getting there." And for the first time, the cliffside was still, not just quiet, but free. The sky above Riven Bay was clear for the first time in weeks. The sea stretched quiet and blue beneath a pale sun, as if the planet itself had paused to exhale. Dana stood barefoot at the edge of the bluff, wind tugging gently at the loose sleeves of her shirt. The battered survival suit was gone, replaced by something simple, soft, hers. Her fingers played with the thin strip of metal looped around her neck, once a weapon component, now a charm. A reminder. Behind her, Callan stepped out of the shelter, carrying 2 mugs. He was limping slightly, a deep gash on his thigh wrapped tight in fresh gauze. "Still brooding?" he asked, offering her one of the mugs. Dana took it, smirking faintly. "Not brooding. Reflecting. The noble cousin of brooding." She sipped the drink. It was sweet this time. Something herbal. Not his usual gritty sludge. He leaned against the railing, watching the horizon. "You sleep at all?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "A little. No nightmares." "That's new." "It is." They stood in silence, comfort instead of tension stretching between them. "I've been thinking," Dana said after a while. "That always sounds dangerous." She shot him a look, then smiled just a little. "I used to think I was built to survive," she continued. "That surviving was enough. But after what happened here, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I was built for more." Callan tilted his head. "Like what?" She looked at him, eyes brighter than they'd ever been. "Living." He exhaled a laugh. "You're getting philosophical on me." "Someone around here has to." They both chuckled, the sound light in the morning air. Then her tone shifted. "I never told you the whole truth," she said, "about why they were after me." Callan's face went still. "I figured," he said gently, "when you were ready." Dana reached in her pocket and pulled out a small chip, no bigger than a fingernail. She held it out to him. "They injected this into my neural spine 6 months ago. Said it was for data optimization. But it wasn't. It's a vault. Encrypted. Buried tech. Ancient. Sentient." Callan blinked. "Sentient. I didn't know until it started speaking to me." His eyes narrowed. "Wait, are you saying I wasn't just a scout, Callan? I was the container. They weren't protecting me. They were keeping me from unlocking whatever's inside. He stared at the chip, then back at her. So what now? Dana turned toward the sea. I think it's time to open it. Callan crossed his arms. That doesn't sound safe. She smiled. Safe's overrated. He grinned. Then I guess I'm sticking around. Yeah, she asked. Yeah, he said. You'll need someone to tell you when you're being reckless. I've always needed that. She slipped the chip back in her pocket, then looked at him. Really looked. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You were never invisible, Dana. Just underestimated. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder as the waves rolled on below them. And far out in the sky, beyond the clouds, a single light flickered, a sign that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Here is the story ends. If you enjoyed and want to watch more thrilling sci-fi adventures, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Dive into epic battles, explore distant galaxies, and join brave heroes as they fight for survival against impossible odds. Let us know in comments if you want next chapters to publish soon. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of the journey. Together, we'll keep the last light burning. Subscribe now and let the adventure continue.